Hello, everyone. I'm Laura Humm. I'm one of the Dialogue Doctor editors, and I am here today with Madeline Davis, reading historical fantasy, right? Is that what you're calling it?
Mhm.
Yeah. Will you tell us a little bit about yourself and a little about your story?
So Madeline Davis is a student more than anything else. Always loved learning about history, and I love great stories. And I wanted to combine the two of those with this particular story, The Dragon Sorcerer, um, which is based off of two historical characters, Louis IX and Isabel of France, 13th century, and their lives look normal until a dragon sorcerer shows up. So I am messing with the history a little bit, but staying true to the people and a lot of the circumstances that actually um, governed their lives. And so, yeah, combining these two loves in a tale that follows them as they become the prince and the princess that the kingdom needs.
That's so exciting. How did you get into 13th century French history?
That's a good question. I've I guess always been fascinated by medieval history, and my particular field of study is classics. So I study Latin and Greek texts, and um, particular Latin texts from the 13th century were really interesting to me in philosophy. And so Louis IX as a particular character who brought together a few different things. He was at the hub of a lot of cultural developments. He got the University of Paris rolling, built the Aix-en-Chapelle. He went on a crusade. He did a lot of different crazy things in the 13th century. And a really interesting character, the way he combined both his personal life and his royal life. So yeah, it was, I guess, not the story that I thought I was going to write, but the story that picked me.
That's fantastic. I always love it when an author finds like a story that just like is they're just craving to tell. I love that. I'm going to give a little spoiler to the end of the chapter here. Your main character loses his arm. Is that a historical truth and you're just changing how it happened, or are you changing the history?
I am changing the history, but then I'm going to change it to fix with the history. So he gets his arm back.
Okay.
The part of the development of the story is him learning to cope with that. And it's a little bit allegorical for what actually happened to him in history in a way. So historically, he didn't lose his arm and then get it back. So as far as we know. But if an historian wrote that, I mean, maybe nobody would have believed it. So
It's true.
maybe this is just a secret history we didn't quite discover.
I love that.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of fiction, right? Is you can do whatever you want in fiction and make it work. But I guarantee you, somebody like me is going to be like, hey, did he really lose his arm? So there we go. Now we've spoiled the story. Do you want to tell a little bit about what's happening in chapter 8 and 9?
Yeah. So I guess leading up to this, they've had normalish prince and princess lives, except for that they've been growing apart. And this demon and this dragon sorcerer have been trying to exploit that. In particular, they have designs on the kingdom as a whole, and the royal house is a good way for them to do that. And so they've been trying to more than kill them, they would rather get them both damned. That's their ultimate goal. So kidnapping might work, but that's not like as simple. If I eat the princess, that's not actually his solution. If I kill the prince, that's not actually the end goal. So this is the point in which the dragon sorcerer, who's gained the trust of the princess through lying to her and pretending to be a wonderful friend, and then having to suddenly show his hand and take her forcibly a little sooner than he was expecting. Um, has kidnapped her and taken her to a cave as a dragon, which he can change into.
Mm-hmm.
Surprisingly for them, 13th century people didn't actually think people turned into dragons willy-nilly. It's kind of fun to play with that they were plenty skeptical of all kinds of things that we also would be. Um, and yeah, the prince earlier made an oath to defend her and the kingdom defeat any such outrageous creature that could pose a threat to them, defeat it single-handedly. He has a lot of pride in his martial skill, but he's starting to realize pride might actually be the reason the dragon is here in the first place. So a few different things going on in the battle between these two.
Excellent. And I love how that fits so nicely, like in the fantasy genre, in this idea that, okay, we're pretty sure that stuff like this didn't happen historically, but if they did, this might be what it looks like. So I definitely love that idea that like the punishment for too much pride or too much wanting as a royal could be that not just regular people are out to harm you, but demons and sorcerers. So I think that's a lot of fun. So in these chapters, I'm going to go ahead and try to share my screen as I talk, which of course, anyone who has ever listened to me do one of these knows that it is practically impossible for me to do two things at once. Not too bad there. Okay. So we've got chapters 8 and 9 here. And chapter 8 is told from Eleanor's perspective. She is trapped in a cave, and then she has a confrontation with, is it Simon?
Simon.
Simon, the dragon sorcerer who is being aided by a demon. And he's basically set this trap where she's locked in this cave because he's luring the prince to her. Almost feels like his master plan is to get them together and see if they'll both kind of fall at the same time. And it makes more sense now that you've said, like, his goal is not to just kill them, but he wants to basically have control of them. Is that fair?
Yeah, basically. Yeah, get them to compromise on something that yeah, they wouldn't otherwise.
Okay, excellent. Now you have created quite the challenge for yourself in that Eleanor's trapped in a cave by herself, so she doesn't have anybody to talk to. And then when Raymond shows up, he is also by himself, and Eleanor has been turned into a bird, so he has no one to talk to. So, like in the very first moments, we're always talking about like how do we get words in people's mouths sooner and faster and that sort of thing. So you've definitely created a challenge for yourself, but you did a really neat thing in that you have given her a magical ability that anything she embroiders has some power to it. Obviously, you've explained that in an earlier chapter, so I didn't understand it completely, but I didn't need to. Go ahead.
Okay, well, maybe a little bit. It's not just inherent, it's more of a magic that the dragon sorcerer taught her. It was kind of alluring to her, and one of the ways he um, made his presence much more amenable. And she knows it's basically wrong, actually.
Okay.
So what she's writing, like, the letter, that's not magical, but she can make embroidery magic that would manipulate people.
Got it.
And that's what the dragon sorcerer kind of thinks is the angle to that he thought was most likely for her to fall into.
Okay. That sounds good. So as I was reading the story, I really wanted a very heightened sense of emotion throughout these two chapters because they feel like they're really kind of the climax of this part of the story, right? Like this sorcerer dragon has weaseled his way into Eleanor's heart, which as a reader makes me a little skeptical. Like, how is this older peddler gentleman getting to be Eleanor's BFF enough that she trusts him? But I trust you as an author that you made that work in earlier chapters, so I'm okay with it, right? And that's the thing about readers and authors is, especially when you get to this point in a story, they trust you enough that's like, well, I don't quite understand all the details there, but I'm willing to go along with what you've got. I'm willing to read the world that you've set up here. So the first two paragraphs that you have are Eleanor telling us that she's been in the cave long enough that she's tried to climb a wall and fallen several times. She's almost drowned because she's tried to follow the water out. But all of these things are told to us. We don't actually see them. So that's not necessarily a bad thing, especially if you're trying to move your plot along. If you're trying for the emotional intensity of this, I would definitely turn this around and give Eleanor a rock to talk to, or she's talking to the river, or she's talking to herself, or she's talking to the dragon back when he was her best friend, or something, just to give her this ability to be like, what time is it? Oh my gosh, how long have I been here? You know, she tries to climb it and she's like, almost, almost, almost. And then she comes tumbling down to the bottom, right? Like that's going to create that immediacy for the reader that is going to kind of promote the fear of, oh, I'm really trapped. But that's one technique. The other technique is more of a summary that you've used here, which is like, this really isn't the important part. I just need the reader to know that she's trapped, because I need the important part to be she's angry at her brother for allowing her to get trapped. She's angry at this guy who isn't a guy. He's a dragon demon sorcerer, right? Like, so it's okay to do this. I just would definitely caution you that when you set up a scene like this, you have taken a lot of the emotional intensity and tamped it down a little bit. Again, not a problem, just means you have to work a little harder to ratchet it up. So she's alone in this cave for at least 2 days. And it's almost as if in this third paragraph, she calmly gives up on her escape and pulls this sampler out from under the rock. And she has been pulling thread out from her skirt to be able to embroider into this. Here you refer to it as a sampler, later you refer to it as a handkerchief. Again, I think that's kind of the French history, right, of us, kind of you helping us see kind of what life was like. And I love that. Like, definitely don't change that. And then you start using italics here, which I can't tell if it's the actual embroidery or if it's what she's thinking, because you do make a switch with the use of italics about halfway through. It's not a problem. I will just say, because I'm channeling my inner Jeff who hates all things italics, is that it can be very confusing for a reader if you're using things in one format and then changing and using that format for another thing. What you may want to do, because again, in a written format, you have the ability to do that, maybe change the font, maybe use bolding for the things that are embroidered instead of italics, to again, just help the reader understand what's embroidery and what's internal thought. Again, these are just minor, like, hey, if you're thinking about it, here we go, especially because you said the bold words. Now, obviously, you meant the bold words as in like the emotional impact of them, right? So you have her saying, the dragon attack is my fault and yours, Raymond. And then she has an entire paragraph that describes kind of what happened. And then she goes on to say, after all, you were the one who had boasted about your sister, had nothing in the world to fear, and you had to brag that the everlasting hills, that nothing could get past you to her, right? Like, so this is her kind of being mad at her brother for being in this situation. As a reader, I'm really confused now, because her brother didn't trap her in this cave. The dragon did. What I want to see here is some anger, some frustration about being trapped. And I want that anger to be bouncing off of the walls, both in a literal and maybe even a figurative way. Go ahead, you look like you have something.
Yeah. So is it helpful to know that this is her embroidery that she's writing to her brother?
Um, I got that from the
Okay.
context. It still doesn't make sense to me. If
Okay.
so, I
You need both. You need to see her anger about her situation, more generally speaking, like her
yes,
thoughts, and then also, okay, this is the angry
right.
message that she's kind of leaving to her brother. Okay.
Yes.
I
So
mean,
it's like,
she's had the 2 days to kind of cool down, is the idea in some ways. And it's not like all cooling, but it's also resigned in the way that she's trying to get it out. Like what she's leaving for her brother is this message more than this is the height of the expression of her frustration, if
if
that
you're
makes
going
sense.
to do that, then I need to see the height of the frustration about being first trapped. Because as a reader, I'm almost always putting myself in the vehicle character's position, right? That's why we call them the vehicle character, because we're going on a ride with them, an emotional ride. So I try to think about how I would feel if I was trapped in a cave for 2 days. I am hurting and I'm sore because I tried to climb that stupid cliff wall. I almost drowned twice because I wasn't strong enough to swim against the current. So I'm exhausted. I'm probably cold. I'm hungry and I'm angry at this stupid dragon. I'm angry at myself because I let this stupid man trick me and my stupid brother. If he hadn't been spouting off at the mouth, then maybe this dragon would, right? Like all of that anger, all of that emotion, I just want to get out of here, all being put just into a embroidery doesn't feel big enough, especially because yes, it's been 2 days and I'm exhausted, but the longer I'm here, the less hope I have of getting out, the more desperate the words need to be. When she's thinking about, like, this is my fault, this is your fault, you said these things, I did these things, it's very logical as opposed to the panic that is likely to come with being trapped and hungry and tired and sore and probably cold, because I don't know much about caves, but I feel like caves are cold. Maybe that's wrong.
If she's wet, if she's wet, that makes sense.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, so if you're going to put me as the reader next to Eleanor in this cave, I should feel uncomfortable with what's happening. Maybe after I throw a couple rocks at the wall, maybe I snatch up this embroidery and I look at it and I throw it back down across the room and maybe I yell at it and I'm like, whatever. I'm not sure what direction that you want to go to show that agitation, but I, as a reader, want to feel that agitation. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think I want this point to be after the anger, but I see that the anger should be shown. Maybe in the chapter before this, that would make a little more sense. The chapter before this is the dragon sorcerer and the demon um, having a conversation. Eleanor's off screen weeping, and the demon tells him, "You've lost her." Like she's finally actually gotten to the point where she's resigned and she's okay with you killing her rather than she's not angry anymore at that point. So I haven't shown her anger, but it would be before this, I feel like. That makes sense. She's resigned more than desperate,
So,
if that's clear.
okay. So if you're going with this, like, this is my,
Goodbye.
I've given up everything, then you're, then the words have to be more of an apology than her trying to work through her anger at Raymond. So feelings, especially in traumatic events, tend to have big, bold sweeping. Not everyone, not every situation, but when readers are reading situations like this, they're reading for those big, bold emotions, things that they're not feeling in themselves. So, yeah, maybe you do put a big scene of her like throwing things and screaming and yelling at the top of her lungs at Raymond and herself. And then she sits down and she starts stitching in anger. And as she's stitching, maybe she's missing, um, missing the letters or spelling things wrong, and she's pricking her fingers, and she throws it away and she lays down and she weeps. And when she finishes weeping and she has nothing left, then she can pull it out, and then she can, with all of that like resignation. But when you have that kind of resignation, it's not going to be about placing the blame or like this bitterness that you have, that you're trying to have come through. It's going to be more of like, they're rulers, they're the ruling class, so maybe it's an apology to the people. I'm sorry we weren't able to protect you. This is my fault, this is my brother's fault. He was a braggart and all I wanted was to be whatever her fault was, right? Like, because once you get into that layer of resignation, you're no longer trying to work through that anger. So like, I definitely hear what you're saying, and I can absolutely agree that if you're going to push the scene into that, like, yes, he's going to kill me when he comes back. And when he comes back, I'm just going to sacrifice myself and I'm going to tell him, just get this over with. Just promise me you won't hurt any of my people. Promise me you won't hurt my brother, which interestingly enough, in your next chapter is what Raymond's trying to do, right? Like, he's like, okay, take me, just save her. It's not her fault, not our people, right? Like, promise you won't do this, right? Like, so you kind of have this, like, you're setting it up for that. And it does give a nice, like, it seems as though this is happening because they've both done wrong. So this is kind of their acknowledgement, or her acknowledgement, that things were done wrong. And now she's going to try to rectify it. If that's going to be the case, then you want this embroidery to be more of a reconciliation and less bitterness trying to blame her brother. So I would say pick an emotion and go really big with it because that's what readers want when they're reading a story about somebody trapped, right? Like, they're there for the anger, they're there for the, I'm going to do anything, I'm going to pull these walls down. And then they're there for that moment of like despair where it's like, there's nothing else I can do, just take me, right? Like, maybe she's screaming to the dragon, just come kill me, just come kill me, just get me out of here. Death is better than this cold, wet cave, right? Like, whatever it is, just go big in the emotions, because that's what's going to pull your readers in, and that's what's going to hold them. Because if we're thinking about like, why is she here? This like anger at Raymond might make sense in the earlier stages, but if it's really at this place where she's kind of in the desperate, resigned mode, then push her to that direction. Does that make sense?
Okay, yeah. So if I'm getting you right, the message in the embroidery sounds a little too logical for her initial anger, but
Yes.
it is more of the initial kind of bitterness rather than the resignation. So it doesn't quite bridge the two, but it's somewhere in between them in a way.
Yes, exactly. You've got
Okay.
the
I
logic of the desperation at the end, because when we get to a state of desperation, and it's like that bargaining, if you will, if you're like kind of thinking of the 5 stages of grief, and I don't mean to at all anyone who is grieving and listening to this, I'm not at all belittling like the stages of grief to bring them into fiction writing, but there is this like, she's grieving, she's probably very angry that she's locked up. Maybe there's some denial about, no, this isn't really happening to me, I'm going to be able to get out. And there's that bargaining stage of like, nope, he's going to come back and I'm going to tell him this and he's going to do this and I'm going to tell him this and we're going to, right? And then there's some depression, and then there's an ultimate acceptance. So if you're going to go in the earlier stages, like the words here feel like they're in the earlier stages, but the logical piece is more in that bargaining and acceptance phase. So, and it's okay to have multiple different waves of this at different pieces, but then use your summary paragraphs or your prose paragraphs to explain the change in the emotion. So we're seeing the ups and downs with it, but by boosting the intensity of it and explaining it to us, it holds us captive as readers and doesn't make us go, well, wait, what was it that what was it that he said in chapter 2 that was really boasting about the sister? Right? Like, yeah, oh yeah, I kind of remember that. Oh yeah, he did kind of shout all the time that nobody could get past him. Oh yeah, right? Like I don't want to be thinking about that. I want to be thinking about, oh, she's scared. Oh, she's angry. Oh, yeah, yep. If I was there, that's what I would be doing. I'd be throwing rocks too. I'd be right. Like maybe she gets mad because she pricks her finger with the embroidery needle and there's a smudge of blood. And then it's like, oh, then now she has to go, I don't know, dunk it in the river. I don't know what people do when they're trapped, but like that's what we want to see. We want to see that desperation. So just ratchet up those emotions. And make them less logical, because logic doesn't tend to be the first thing that happens when we're held captive. Again, not that I've ever been held captive, but like imagining what it would be like to be held captive. And then what that's going to do is it's not going to leave any room for your readers to think about anything but what is happening to Eleanor in the immediate. Because when I'm reading this and I'm hearing her kind of talk about her brother, I start thinking, well, where is Raymond? And then, I hear her kind of talk about the dragon attack. And then I'm like, oh, where's the dragon? What's that dragon look like? Does this dragon fly? Or is this one of those like walking dragons? I don't know. I don't really know enough about dragons, but
At this point, yeah.
right, you talk to me about a dragon and now I'm thinking about a dragon. But you want to keep the emotional flow strong enough that my mind isn't wandering to other things, because it's all about Eleanor right now, because this is her story right now. She's our vehicle. We want to be there with her. So, and that kind of continues all the way through until Simon shows up, right? And when he shows up, the very first thing he does is he snatches this sampler out of her hand, right? And he has this very calm, very purposeful, a diary. How interesting. Her response to that was, I wasn't finished. Now, granted, she yells and she's protesting a little bit, but with no hope, right? If I have been pouring my heart and my soul into something that I've been hiding under a rock because I don't want this dragon sorcerer to see it, my response to him snatching it out of my hand is not going to be, no, I wasn't finished. It's going to be, give that back. And maybe it's give that back as I throw fists at him, but he's a dragon. And even in his human form, he's stronger than me. So maybe he's got, one arm outstretched and I'm flailing at him, screaming, and he's very calm. So you can still embroider, just not for me, right? Like, I like that you have him calm and purposeful, but her response to that is also very calm and logical. When he says, just not for me, she's like, no, never for you, right? Like, she's still trying to reach for it, but he's too fast for her. So she gives up for the moment. And then he goes on to this, well, that's a pity. I was hoping that you would be hungry by now, right? Like, and then he starts talking about Kate. And um, and then again, he's like saying things like, I acquired a few choice options. And then her response to that is, you stole things, you mean? No, thank you, right? Like, she's so logical in this moment. It's like they're reverting back to when they were best friends and she's not trapped in a cave, right? Like, maybe he told her a lie and she's just mad because he lied to her, right? Whereas he's had her locked in a cave for 2 days. He just stole the one thing that was giving her a little bit of peace and solace. And yeah, I totally understand her giving up and not fighting for it, because she's like planning her attack. She's going to throw something and distract him or whatever. She knows that she can't outstrength him because he's a dragon sorcerer, right? Like, but I want to feel again more of that desperation in this moment. We don't exactly know how long it's been since she's spoken to him, but even in her desperation of like, I've been here for 2 days, it's been a long time, there has to be like part of her that feels a little bit of relief that he did come back for her and he didn't just leave her to like die in this cave. Yes, she was resigned to it. Yes, she was okay that she was willing for that to happen, but now he shows up. Now there's a little bit of hope. But what's that hope turning into? Is she going to fight like a banshee? Is she going to do this like nice person act, which is like, yeah, absolutely, I will do whatever you do, just let me out of here and promise not to hurt my brother, promise not to, right? Like maybe she's in that bargaining stage with him, maybe whatever it is. Again, I want to see, as a reader, I want to see these huge emotions as it's relating to this person, because again, I've been trapped in a cave with her for 2 days. So my emotions should be raw. Her emotions should be raw, especially if she just went through this. I'm willing to die for my people. I will do anything to protect my brother. He's really the one who can lead our people into the next century, or, whatever he's leading them into at that moment, right? Like you have all of that already, but the emotions are really what I want to show up for in these scenes, especially because we know what's coming in the next chapter, because I got a little sneak preview and because you're the author, right? We want our readers to be holding on really, really tight in these moments, because we don't want them to get distracted because the timer goes off or because the phone rings or whatever. We want to keep holding on to them. So all that makes sense? Excellent.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, so just a couple of things that I wanted to show you that really helped me kind of understand what it was that was happening as I was reading, because as I was reading, I was really interested in the story, but I didn't feel the ups and downs and the emotion that I really wanted to. So the first thing that I tend to do when I'm diagnosing a chapter that doesn't feel quite right. The beats are right. I know that she needs to try to climb out. I know that she needs to use the embroidery. I know that he needs to come back and take it from her and use it as leverage, right? Like all of those beats make sense, but I wasn't able to feel that like emotional punch. You have probably noticed what I did here, but I color coded each of the voices. She's yellow, he's green. It just helps me be able to go back through and very quickly notice what's happening in the scene from a language perspective. You can see kind of his calm demeanor throughout, but she's having these really small punching kind of sentences. No, I wasn't finished. No, never for you. Stole things, you mean. No, thank you. Right? Like the cadence of those, seeing them together helps me diagnose the fact that maybe we need more emotion from her. It's a little harder to see it when we're reading it with the body language and the prose and the summary statements that are in between. So I would definitely recommend for you and for anyone who's listening who is having a hard time with, like, I just need more of an emotional punch, to be able to see which part of the scene they really want to put more punch into. Color coding is almost always the way I go for that, just because it's really a lot easier to see. So I did go through for this whole chapter and do the green and the yellow for her. Green for him, yellow for her. And this is also nice because it kind of helps us see where we have a lot of one person and not a lot of another. So again, if you're trying to boost your emotional intensity, oh, I missed a spot for him. This is all him, which actually in this case doesn't help the balance. It puts more into him than it does to her. When you have a fight here, and this is a particularly interesting fight that you've got, because you've got a sorcerer, and anytime anybody says sorcerer, I immediately think Merlin, right? He's probably not your Merlin, but like he's just the sorcerer I think of first. And I think about how powerful a sorcerer could be. Even if he's not Merlin, sorcerers are pretty powerful. But then you tell me that he's a dragon sorcerer and he has the ability to turn into a dragon. And now I'm like, okay, he had all this power as a sorcerer, and now he's got all this power as a dragon. And then you reveal in here that he's got a demon who's helping him make all these decisions. And then part of me is like, how are Eleanor and her brother ever supposed to win? Like, there's no chance that they're going to win. And then part of me as a reader is like, well, if they don't really have a chance to win, then what's the point of me even fighting? But that also on the flip side of it is like, oh, but maybe this is like a David and Goliath kind of thing. And it like gives me this little bit of excitement of like, wait a minute, maybe if they can outwit, and then of course I think Survivor, outplay, outwit, outlast, whatever it is, right? Like, I mean, it's catchy for a reason, right? Like if there's a way that they can level the playing field, and maybe it's their passion for their leadership, or maybe it's their brother sister bond that that the evil in the story can't touch, whatever it is, help us to see that while he's taking power over her. Because in these sections here where you have a lot of him talking and a lot of her thinking in her head and a lot of her screaming no and never, what you're doing is you're pulling the power dynamic apart. You're making him really big and really strong and really powerful, and you're showing how weak and defenseless she is. I'm in for that as a reader. I just have to understand what it is that gives her hope in these situations. Is it that she's hopeful that her brother is going to show up? Is it she's hopeful that she can actually outwit him because he's got this embroidery that she's shown us already, but she has an embroidery in her pocket that actually she's going to use on him? Whatever it is that's giving her that little bit of edge, that little bit of hope, that's helping to balance this huge power versus this teeny tiny little person who is, I'm assuming, just a mortal, right? And compared to this, like, whatever, like, help us see where that glimmer of hope, why is it that when she was first locked in this cave 2 days ago, she didn't just give up? Why wasn't she, why when he dragged her away, didn't she just like flop on the ground and be like, just kill me here, right? Like, she's been fighting for 2 days in this cave. Help us see and understand why that is, so that when he does this terrible thing by turning her into a bird so that she can't talk to her brother who's showing up, we can kind of see that a little bit more. So you're going to have to elevate her a little bit more. I like how you use the italics to help us understand what's happening in her head, to keep her relevant in the scene. But by not having her talk to him, he just becomes more and more and more powerful in the scene, and she becomes less and less and less powerful. And that dynamic will eventually get to a point where, as a reader, I'm like, all hope is lost. So maybe I'm going to go turn on the TV where I can watch somebody who's the underdog come back and fight back really strong, right? Like, you don't want to give your reader that chance to be able to think. You always want them thinking, even in the moment where all is lost, not all is lost, right? Like, we have to be able to see some kind of outcome. So by balancing, and again, a good way to be able to see this is to kind of do the lines, because the more powerful he gets, the more lines you're giving him, which is something that we as authors do all the time, because space is power, right? Like, so
Yeah.
yeah. And then the only other thing that I wanted to draw to your attention is the end of this scene and the beginning of the next scene. So you do this really smart thing in that he, meaning Simon, the all-powerful dragon sorcerer demon holder, he knows that Raymond is coming. It seems as though he's kind of like put out the word that, hey, this is kind of where we are, come find us. Um, but he doesn't want her to be able to be like, well, this is what's been happening, let's work together, right? Because at some point he has to show that he's a little bit afraid of the two of them being together and what happens in their power as they're working together, right? Like, again, with this idea that he's all powerful, but there are some limits to his power. And what those limits to his power are totally up to you, because dragons don't exist, didn't exist, whatever. Like, you're the author, you get to make them do whatever you want them to do. But the one thing that we want to be able to see is more overlap between the two of them. So the brother is kind of running through the woods looking for her. She's being turned into a sparrow, and the sorcerer is just kind of like hanging out waiting for this to happen. Maybe what needs to happen long about here, where the dragon's like, I'm not that easily deceived. And then she's like, whatever, you're going to do whatever you're going to do. And he's laughing at her and is ready to turn her into this sparrow. Maybe we need to hear Raymond shouting in the woods and calling her name. Or maybe Raymond's not by himself. Maybe there's a hunting party, or not a hunting party, a search party. Ooh, those are two very different kinds of parties. Maybe these
So.
right? Maybe he's got a search party coming out, and maybe he leaves her again and goes and fights and then comes back and has all this like whatever powerful, and he knows that Raymond's in the area, and that's what's ratcheting up the tension again. But right now it's very much like we're wrapping up this situation, and now he shows up, and now the tables have turned. But you can change the tension if we know he's getting closer, but he doesn't know how close he is. Because if he shows up 5 minutes before, he gets there before she turns into a sparrow, right? But we don't know that there's that tension there, because we don't actually know where he is and we don't know where they are. So if you can kind of bring him into the scene before he's actually in the scene, that gives us a little bit more of that panic of, okay, maybe, oh, nope, sorry, pulled the rug out from under us there. So.
Okay, so a little more than like she hearing his voice
Yep.
there. We want more of that kind of back and forth, kind of
Right.
extending that for a bit.
Yep. Yep. She hears his voice. She starts to shout at him. And that's why the dragon snatches her. Right. Because right now he kind of wraps his tail around her, because she like tries to grab the thing out of his hand again. But like she's tried to do it like 6 times, and every other time he's like just swatted her away. But this feels like an escalation from him. Help us to understand why that escalation is. So she has to do something that's worthy of that level of escalation, because again, he has all the power. If he has all the power, why would he turn into a dragon to wrap his tail around her when he was able to just keep throwing her against the wall with just one hand and a little bit of magic, right? So that's kind of where you want us. Plus, if she shouts to him, Raymond's maybe not 100% sure he hears her, but maybe he shouts back twice as much, and then she's completely silent now. And then maybe he starts to like go in the other direction, and she's pleading in her mind, like, no, don't go, I'm here, like whatever it is. Again, you can kind of create that tension by helping us to know something that a different character doesn't know.
Okay. I'll have to work it a little differently because she doesn't want him to come, but maybe I should make that clearer too.
So, and maybe what she says to him then is go home, right? Like, which is weird because if there's a search party out for her, right? Maybe it goes the other way. Maybe they hear Raymond and the dragon like goes to put out some kind of dragon call. I don't know what sound dragons make. I really am very unprepared in my knowledge of dragons to be able to help you with this scene here. I'm gonna have to do some research. Like maybe he's making a sound or he's doing something to draw her in, and she does something much bigger than just reaching for the embroidery. Maybe she does something and actually hurts him a little bit because she doesn't want, she wants them to stay hidden from him. So you could do the same thing, but just turn it around to fit your story better. Because again, if she doesn't want him there, let us see that. But going back to the earlier part of the scene, when she was kind of angry with him with the embroidery, if she's angry with him, she likely wants him punished at the same way she's being punished. So him not being here is kind of counterintuitive for that. So again, you just kind of want to smooth out the emotional edges of that. Like, does she want him to pay for this with her or does she not, right? Like him getting away being a good thing because he can continue being the ruler. Because I'm assuming that Simon wants to get them under his control so he actually has more power over France. Maybe.
Yeah, basically. It's a little bit more complicated. It's actually the demon wants the control. Simon made a deal with the demon to get what he wanted. What he wanted was a little bit different. Probably don't need to go into his backstory. He's not the one who actually wants the control of France. It's the demon.
But he's doing it for the demon because he made it.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yep.
Same thing.
And so that's another thing that can happen here. You had mentioned that like chapter 7 is Simon and the demon kind of hashing things out. You have a moment here where Simon says something to someone that Eleanor can't see or hear, which was a very interesting moment for me as a reader because I was like, oh, there's more going on here. But it was so brief that I didn't spend a lot of time with it. But maybe that's what happens is maybe in dragon form, you have Simon using all of his dragon power because Eleanor's been able to get through a little bit of his wizardry power or sorcerer power. And then that's when the demon shows up and is like, you are messing this up. Get yourself back into like whatever. I don't know why this demon is so sassy, but like whatever it is, right? Like he's putting the pressure on, which then again gives Eleanor the opportunity to take a little bit of the power back because Simon is distracted, right? So like as you're bringing these elements together, what makes the story more interesting for us as readers is if we are seeing the cracks in the armor that the weaker people, in this case, Eleanor and her brother, are able to exploit. And you're talking about that, before we turn the recording on, you talked about that a little bit before about why Raymond is showing up to this fight without his armor, right? Like he's got an ultimate plan of like, I'm going to sacrifice myself. So this is why I'm going to show up this way. And again, it's that David and Goliath kind of story where you have him showing up to fight an all-powerful sorcerer / dragon with nothing but his sword. We have to understand that in the same way we have to understand why Eleanor hasn't given up at these what feels like very desperate moments. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All of that to say your plot points are right. Like the plot makes sense. She's trapped sorry, my dog was growling. I wasn't sure if she was liking the plot points or she had something different to say. But the beats, the beats are right. The way that the story is unfolding, you've definitely given it a lot of thought as to kind of where she is in her emotional story, what she wants from her brother, what her brother wants from her. Like all of those beats are right. Just push that emotional intensity and just really let us in on that emotional story, because that's what's going to keep your reader coming back. Because if I read your notes right, this is chapters 8 and 9 of the book 1, and you've got another book after this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just more one long book, really. I've been splitting it kind of into two because
It's long.
the two different halves of the story, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I love it. I think that's
But
great. And again, the more you can hold on to us here, the more we're going to want to spend time with Eleanor and Raymond as we get into the later chapters of this book. And then when that book ends, we're going to want to pick up the other book because we're now emotionally connected to them. We're emotionally invested. We spent 2 days in a cave with Eleanor. We helped her fight. We watched her brother lose his arm. Right, like all of those moments, just really think about what in these beats of my story, what are the emotions that my reader is going to want to connect to? And let's make sure Raymond and Eleanor have them, right? So in chapter 9, when Raymond finally realizes that Eleanor is this bird who's been like flying around and trying to help him, right? Like there has to be this moment of like, Eleanor, I've been looking for you. But as it is right now, he just recedes into himself and is like, oh, that's my sister. She's been a bird all this time, right? Like it's very, all the emotions are very polite. It's as if we are like discussing something as opposed to living it. And there are lots of times in stories where we want to discuss emotion, but readers come back page after page, chapter after chapter, book after book, because they want to live the emotions. So that is my encouragement for you. So, any other questions before we turn the recording off?
oh, no, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story and your knowledge of 13th century France. I learned so much. So
There's a lot there. I think it's a great time.
it is, I'm very interested to read and learn more about it. So thank you again for sharing your story with us. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the recording.